All right, so let's talk about something when it comes to being a disciple that is probably not talked about enough, and that is the necessity of community, the necessity of being in deep relationships with other disciples. I think far too often we see being a disciple, discipleship, whatever you want to call it, as kind of an individualistic thing. I, as an individual, am choosing to be a disciple of Jesus. So I'm going to study hard. I'm going to change so that I can be just like him and I can embody him to my friends and family and into this world. Or maybe you've experienced something like I have, and that's kind of a mentorship type thing where there is an older gentleman or an older woman who, kind of takes you under their wings. You meet together, every other week, maybe once a week. And, maybe there's a book or scripture passages they give you, and you get together and you chat and you talk about it. That can be hugely impactful. So I don't want anyone to think that that I'm saying that that's not important. But is that the extent? This is the question of what God thinks about or God envisions when he talks about us being his disciples. Because whenever Jesus called his disciples, he didn't just call them to himself. He called them to each other into a deep family type relationship with one another. They were going to be traveling together. They were going to be eating together. They would be sleeping in the same places, right? So this was doing life together. And it was needed because Jesus's mission was dangerous, right? Jesus's mission still is dangerous. They needed one another. And whenever he was leaving, when he would leave, it's kind of hard. I don't know why that was so hard to say. They needed each other all the more as this kingdom spread, as there was there were people that came against the kingdom. They were going to have to stick together and to rely on one another. But that shouldn't come as a surprise to us, because all throughout Scripture, we see God working with groups of people. We don't see, there may be individuals that he calls. He may call Moses, but why is he calling Moses? It is for the people of Israel, right? Even when Abraham is called, it's so that a nation can be birthed from him that does what? That blesses all the nations of the earth. God is not a God who works in silos, but a God who works in community. And so what does that look like? Because there may be some of us who believe that we're in, this deep-rooted community. Maybe some of us are in it, and it's wonderful and difficult and challenging. Some of us here may be saying, some of you may be saying, I don't have that at all. Can you explain what you're talking about? And or I need that deeply. So let's talk about what I'm maybe not sharing or what I'm not talking about right now. And that is, I'm not talking about just going to church on Sunday, though can be very beneficial. And I go to church on Sundays. And I say go to church. We are the church, whatever. Another element that it could be viewed as is maybe being part of a small group, which I've done in the past. Small groups can be hugely beneficial. But I'm not sure that is, again, the extent to what God calls us to as disciples in community with one another. It can. I've been a part of small groups that are very deeply related and that are doing some life together. I've also been a part of some that we don't see each other much outside of the one time, we get together a week. Maybe someone calls me or something, but we're not, as Jesus' disciples were doing, we're not living and doing life together as the people of Israel throughout all of Scripture. You see over and over, they are living and doing life together. So what do I mean by doing life together? I mean having a group of folks where you are bearing one another's burdens. So for example, maybe a set of parents is having to work overtime and it's challenging. Do they feel comfortable enough to call you and say, hey, do you mind picking my kids up from school? In our culture in America, in this highly individualized, pull ourselves up from our bootstraps culture, That is a difficult ask. I know it's a difficult ask for me to ask someone else's parents to do something like that. But do we have people in our lives that we can do that? If our mowers break down, right? Do we have people that we would call pretty quickly? I'm not saying are there people that I guess I could call, but you are doing so much life together that you will easily pick up the phone and go, "Hey, I'm having this issue. What do you think?" Even if they aren't handy, they can help point you in the right direction, help me kind of figure this out. Are we eating, having meals together, with our families? I think something that really came up as I was thinking about this is a lot of us had these types of relationships when we were in college. If you had the opportunity to go to college, and you could maybe even say high school for that matter, especially whenever you get your driver's license, your kind of junior, senior year, and you're able to like go hang out with your friends. But let's talk about that. Let's talk about in college, whenever many times people go off and they share dorms, they share apartments together. You are doing life together. You and your friends are eating together. You're hanging out all the time. You're, going and playing sports together or shopping together. You're studying together, right? You're doing things together. They became, for those who experience that, like family to you, right? You are spending all kinds of time together. For many of us, there's a huge hole and gap that is left when we leave college or situations like that. Whenever we start seeing our friends get married, and as they're, getting married, they're not spending as much time with us. And then maybe we get married and we're not able to spend as much time with them. Maybe my spouse doesn't, click with their spouse the same way that I click with my friend, right? These are just realities. Then we start having children, right? And then that further complicates things. And especially here in America, we go get our own house kind of on our own cul-de-sac. And we oftentimes don't really build deep relationships with other people that are in our neighborhood. And before we know it, we're raising kids and we don't have those relationships that we once had. We don't have, besides maybe actual family, which is awesome and part of being a disciple, particularly if they are following the Lord hard. But we lose and don't have often those types of relationships that we once had. Can we cultivate that again? I think that's a really good question. And I would have to say it's not easy. I think it's necessary. When I read scripture, I believe it's necessary. So if you're sitting there going, I used to have something like that, maybe I've never had that, where do I start? First, it's a long process. There's no magic bullet to having deep-rooted friends that follow the Lord and walk as disciples of Jesus together and learn together and cry together and grow together. But it starts simply. I'm kind of a simple guy. I feel like it starts simply. It starts with a call and let's have coffee. I probably wouldn't lead with, "Hey, do you want to be my best buddy for life and do life together?" I mean, maybe some of you can do that. Maybe there's some people you feel comfortable with that you just want to say, "Hey, I really want to do this thing. I really want to be a follower of Jesus, a disciple." And I know that it's very important that I have others in my life that are as well. You could do that. But it may just be calling, having coffee, having lunch, hanging out with people. And over time, those relationships can grow. But we have to be intentional. I know there have been people in my life that complain that they don't have those relationships. And number one, it can be very difficult. And sometimes there is reason to complain. People are just not wanting to do things. But sometimes we have to look at ourselves and realize that there are opportunities, there are invitations that we turn down because we're tired, because we've been working hard, right? Another thought is maybe there are common interest groups that are in your city, in your town. Like I'm a big board game nerd. And so I know that there are several groups here locally that get together and play board games together. And you're going to say, "Well, that doesn't sound very religious, John." Listen, it's about building relationships. If they don't know the Lord, maybe your relationship with them will end. It won't end. will help them come to know the Lord. Let's say that, and then become serious disciples. And then boom, you're starting to have others that are deep relationships. I think that it's vital that it's more than just one person, that we continue to grow that, but it does start somewhere, right? Maybe you're in that community of board groups, and you start board game group, and you start to realize there's other people that are serious followers of Jesus. I know there are in the ones here. And you begin to develop those relationships, right? Or as you're at your church gatherings, you begin to be more intentional about saying hi, trying to talk to people. Maybe do the scary thing of inviting someone out to lunch, right? But it does take intentionality, right? I know this is hard. I know this is difficult for so many of us, but I'm convinced that this is, when we read through Scripture, that this is God's heart for us. If we're serious disciples of Jesus, then we are going to do this thing together.